The mission was going terribly wrong for the 24 Navy SEALs, but they had no way out. Everything they had depended on had failed, and now their only hope of getting out alive was the one person they had left behind. But how would she help them? The day started like any other. Lieutenant Kara Young reported to work at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in San Diego. She had been at the base for 8 years. As a SEAL officer, she was used to all kinds of missions. There was nothing that would stand out as particularly dangerous or difficult. It was just another day at work. So imagine her surprise when she is called into the office of Rear Admiral James Crawford. Crawford was someone Kara knew very well. He'd been her instructor back when she was a new recruit trying to become a SEAL. He was responsible for training the best of the Navy, the men who were willing to risk their lives for their country and for each other. Being called into his office wasn't cause for alarm, but it did mean that something important was about to go down. She entered the office and saw that there was someone else there. A man she hadn't seen in a long time, Petty Officer First Class Michael Hastings. Hastings had retired from active duty a few years back, but he still trained new SEALs. Kara hadn't worked with him much, but she respected him. A lot of the current members of the team did their best to emulate him, because he was the perfect example of a SEAL, strong, brave, and confident. Everyone knew that if he was on the team, they didn't need to worry about anything. Kara, Crawford said as she entered. "I want you to work with Mike here. You know him well enough to work together, I'm sure," Kara responded. "Is everything okay?" Crawford shook his head. "No, not really. There's a situation that has developed overseas that requires our attention. We're sending a team out there to handle it, but I want you and Hastings to go over the details with me. Make sure you know exactly what you're dealing with before you leave." He handed them both a file. Kara opened it and began reading through the contents. The more she read, the more she felt her heart sink. This mission was dangerous, maybe even impossible. Her team was being sent into enemy territory to rescue some people. The problem was that the enemy they were facing was unlike any they'd faced before. They were up against an organization that specialized in weapons of mass destruction. This organization was responsible for some of the worst attacks in recent history, and they weren't afraid of anything. They would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. And to make matters worse, the SEALs had already suffered a major setback. One of their teams had infiltrated the organization's headquarters, but they'd been discovered and most of them killed. Only 4 had managed to escape with their lives. These 4 men were the only ones who knew the layout of the building and the location of their prisoners. And they were going to be the key to rescuing them. The SEALs had decided to use a tactic that involved hiding in the sewers until nightfall. Then they would strike and try to get the hostages out. The problem was that this plan required complete silence. If anyone heard them moving around in the sewers, then the enemy would know they were there, and they would never get out alive. That's where Kara came in. She was an expert in demolitions. Her job was to create devices that could either destroy their enemies or allow the seals to escape. In this case, she was going to create a device that would block sound waves. This device would allow the seals to move around in the sewers without being detected. She and Hastings spent the next few hours poring over the plans for the building and discussing the mission. They needed to make sure everything was perfect. There was no room for error. Finally, they had a plan. It was risky, but it was their only chance of success. Kara would create 3 devices. 2 of them would be placed in the sewers near the extraction point. They would emit a high-pitched sound that would mask the noise of the seals moving around. The 3rd device would be placed inside the building itself. It would emit a lower frequency sound that would disrupt any surveillance equipment the enemy had set up. This would prevent the enemy from tracking the seals as they moved through the sewers. As night fell, the seals got into position. They were carrying weapons, but they were also carrying Kara's 3 devices. Each seal was responsible for planting one of the devices. The first 2 went off without a hitch. The seals infiltrated the building undetected, but the 3rd device was a different story. It was supposed to be planted in a ventilation shaft on the roof, but the seal responsible made a mistake. He planted it in the wrong shaft. This meant that the device wasn't emitting the correct frequency. The enemy was able to track the seals as they moved through the sewers. They were ambushed. Only 4 of the 24 seals managed to escape. They ran for their lives, firing their weapons at the enemy. But it was no use. They were outnumbered and outgunned. They had to abandon their mission and flee. As they ran through the sewers, they could hear the sound of their comrades' screams echoing around them. They had lost so many good men. Now they had to get out of there before they, too, were captured. But there was a problem. The device that Kara had created was emitting a high-pitched sound that was masking the sound of the seals moving around. But that meant that the enemy couldn't see them in the dark. They were invisible, and if they couldn't see the enemy, then they couldn't fight back. So Kara had only one option left. She had to increase the volume of the device so that it would be audible above the sound of gunfire. It was a risky move, but it was their only chance of escaping. She took a deep breath and pulled the lever. The sound of the device increased in volume until it was deafening. The seals could barely hear anything else. But they didn't care. They were almost out of the sewers now. They could see the light of day ahead. Then suddenly, the sound stopped. The device had reached its maximum volume and it couldn't get any louder. Kara cursed under her breath. Now they were trapped. The enemy could hear them now. They were in big trouble. But then she heard a voice coming over the radio. It was Hastings. He was outside the sewer, and he was calling out to the seals. He was trying to get their attention. At first, the seals couldn't respond. The gunfire was too loud. But then one of them broke the silence. "We're here," he yelled. "We're in the sewers." Hastings understood. He knew that they couldn't talk over the radio because the enemy could hear them, so he did something else. He started making his way down the sewers. He was looking for an entrance. The seals could hear him now. They could hear him moving around in the sewers, getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire stopped. The seals looked at each other in surprise. Had they gotten away? Was this the end of the mission? Then they heard Hastings' voice again. This time he was closer. He was right outside the sewer. "I found an entrance," he said. "I'm going to help you guys out." The seals cheered. They had made it. They were alive, and they had Kara to thank for it. She had saved their lives. But she didn't think so. She was still standing in the control room, watching the monitors. She hadn't moved since the mission started. She hadn't even taken a break to eat or drink. She was completely focused on what was happening. She saw the last of the seals emerge from the sewers. They were safe. Relief washed over her. She had done it. She had helped save the lives of 24 men. She was still on duty when the rest of the team returned from their mission. They were all shaken up, but they were alive, and that was thanks to Kara. "You saved our lives," one of the seals told her. "We couldn't have done it without you." Kara blushed. "I was just doing my job," she said. "That's what I'm trained to do." But the seals knew the truth. They knew that Kara had gone above and beyond the call of duty. She had put herself in harm's way to help them, and they would never forget it. They all stood there for a moment, talking about the mission and what had happened. But soon it was time to go. They all had other assignments to carry out. As the seals filed out of the room, they all turned to Kara. "Thank you," they said in unison. "Thank you for saving our lives." And with that, they were gone. Kara watched them leave. She was proud of what she had done, but she was also relieved that it was over. She was glad that she had helped the sea cells, but she was also glad to be able to take a break now. She had been on edge for weeks, ever since the mission had been assigned. She hadn't slept well, she hadn't relaxed, she had been working non-stop. But now she could finally relax. She could finally sleep.